Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Dive In Gartner Innovation Insight, Cyber GRC Streamlines Governance. My name is Ethan Bresnahan. I'm the Senior Marketing Director here at CyberSaint, and today I'm excited to welcome Mike Donaldson, Senior Director of Cyber Risk Services at CyberSaint, and CyberSaint's co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer, Padraic O'Reilly. We're so glad that you can join us. As always, feel free to submit questions throughout the discussion, and with that, I will hand things off to Mike. Welcome, Mike and Patty.
Thanks, Ethan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I'm excited to be here with our founder and Chief Innovation Officer, Padraic O'Reilly. So let's just go ahead and jump into our high-level overview, the key findings from the report. So Padraic, the report emphasizes that 85% of organizations using GRC technology have fragmented systems. So why do you think this is such a pervasive issue, and what can companies do to overcome it?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the question, and thank you too for hosting this. You come from a series of very large organizations where you've seen this problem up close. It's really complex why we've come into this state of play. If you think about it, it has a lot to do with different teams being in different silos. It has a lot to do with, say, bringing in the system integrators to solve one part of it, right? And then those teams might become dependent on some of that and not fully be able to integrate it when those integrators move on. It has a lot to do with the way cyber products go to market. We go to market, generally as specialized solutions. Products don't always play nice across an ecosystem. So there might be several risk management products in a large enterprise, even in a small and medium-sized business. And then teams are disparate, right? You've got the first, second, and third line of defense, and you don't always have perfect coordination among those teams. I've seen cases where, you might have 7 or 8 divisions, each with its own set of standards and frameworks, right? They might all have a cyber risk component, but they're all running it in different spreadsheets, different tools, and it's very hard to translate across, over time. I think there's also the complexity of some of the long-standing problems in our industry, like say threat intelligence management and CTEM and vulnerability management. Some of those areas have progressed over time and got better, certainly, but there's no real final solution to it. There's teams still find themselves exhausted. They're behind. It's not about being proactive. It's about not falling behind at an incredibly slow rate, or trying to fall behind at a slow rate. Instead of getting out ahead of things. So I think there's a lot of change that's coming. So we're seeing a shift in some of this, but I think that might describe some of why we're in this situation.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And to your point, I've seen a lot of the disparity firsthand, especially when there's a lack of enterprise architecture, sound enterprise architecture within a large enterprise, and you have different governance units with different taxonomies and definitions of the company and have different methods of assessing. It really gets to be very convoluted. So in your experience, how can organizations start to consolidate their GRC efforts and create a unified view of cyber risks? And why is this especially important in today's rapidly evolving threat landscape?
Yeah, well, how can they do it? Well, the market and Gartner's research indicate, that it can be done by, consolidating into more of a platform. So, you get away from sort of the point solution. You take an approach to your data and your people that make sure you have a more centralized approach. That probably can't be done immediately, but anything you do has to be done with an eye toward, I'll call it interoperability, instead of everyone staying in the silos, everyone staying in tools that might have limited applicability. So I think that's what the market has pretty much come up with is, you need to move more towards a platform.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because at the end of the day, the threat actors don't really care about our disparity, and we have to be focused uniformly on that. Let's take a deeper dive into some of the specific findings in the report. It also discusses the growing adoption of cyber risk quantification, also known as CRQ, is how we'll refer to it today, to help bridge the communication gap between cyber and business leaders. So explain for us, Padraic, why CRQ is becoming such a crucial component of GRC programs.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a crucial component now. The shift we've seen in the market is that senior leadership is basically saying, hey, you've got a limited budget and you've got to explain to me everything you're doing. And the best way to do that is using CRQ. So if you're able to say, look, this is what it looks like in terms of our exposures, what can we do to efficiently minimize our annual loss expectancies? The previous state of play was sort of, oh, look, we've done all these risk assessments and we've got a lot of high, medium, low findings. We've got a lot of criticality flying around. We've got thousands of assets we've classified. We've done a great job doing all this. And teams brought this to leadership, and leadership was like, so what? You're not telling me anything about my immediate exposure, what we could lose, what could go sideways on us, what it could cost us. And you're also not telling me anything about where the spend is most efficiently deployed. So that's been a shift. I've seen that literally in the system integrators. I've seen it in the enterprise. I've talked to executives who say, look, I need to have an idea around, the financial magnitude of certain things. And that includes the solution side, right? That includes the remediation side. And I think we saw, a great example of it coming through the SEC rules last year, that, you have to have some idea of what your exposures might be. People often conflate, the incident management side, which is the sort of reporting on incidents, with the risk management side. They're connected, obviously, but the SEC did say under 106B, that you have to talk through how you measure possible exposures and what you propose to do about it and how you would remediate or transfer that risk. So I think that's why CRQ is becoming so big. You have to measure in order to manage.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And people are starting to see the problem in that security budgets are starting to tighten, and there's becoming more of a prioritization that relies on financial impact. And you mentioned the SEC regulations as well. But given the SEC regulations are only for publicly traded companies, do you think we're going to see an expansion of these types of regulations and see more, CRQ from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny too, Mike, because we did immediately see some of the publicly traded companies we work with say, look, we really want to get our act together on this front, and it's a big initiative for us. But we also saw a whole bunch of SMBs come in the door immediately on the heels of it. They don't have to report out, but they're being asked by their boards and their C-suites as well to up their game in cyber risk management, to stop running it on spreadsheets that can't translate across departments, and start doing this in a more disciplined way. And I think one of the great trends we're seeing in CRQ is that people in cyber are starting to be a little more open-minded about, some of the quantitative methods you use. I mean, these have been widely adopted in other industries for quite some time, like finance, for example. But in cyber, people were like, well, what is this? I don't know this. So there's been a lag, and I would call it sort of a knowledge gap lag, but that's closing rapidly these days as well. So that's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting to see this starting to become a conversation, because obviously any sound risk management relies on losses, financial impact to have good measurement. And we could probably talk about that all day long, but it's good to bring attention to this topic for the first time in a while. So let's talk about some of the different capabilities that are found within the report. One of them is around, many organizations are moving from traditional compliance-based assessments to continuous monitoring. So how do you see continuous control monitoring and continuous compliance automation reshaping compliance strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as transformative. You can kind of see it down market a little bit, at very small companies like startups, and using solutions that can, hook into some financial management and HR softwares. Very quickly, you have, a framework like SARBANE, SOX, say, accounting standard that, might have 30 or 40% of it illuminated right away. We've been doing control automation for years because it's been a very firm belief of mine that if you're going to, as an enterprise, comply with all the regulatory standards you need to comply with, and also do the extra work, and the extra work is really important because that's security work, and you need to have more data. It's becoming a data issue. Everything is becoming a data issue, right? So instead of the old way we used to do it, when I'd go out on the road when we were starting the company, because we were all consultants, is we'd show up, we'd have the software, we'd have a framework, we'd open it up, we'd put it on the screen, and we'd talk for a week, right? We'd go back and forth, first, second line. We'd call IT, or they'd come in the room. We'd talk about the instantiations of things. We'd write it into the controls. But we weren't getting necessarily the asset richness. So one of the things of beauty about automation is we've had some of the, big clients come in, do a manual assessment, say on the CSF 2.0, for example, and then identify some telemetry sources, right? And run a similar assessment across a stack of, say, 15,000 assets. Compare them side by side. The latter, the one where you're automating, the data is just so much richer. The fidelity is so much higher, right? And you can run jobs on a nightly basis. And if you're doing risk assessment off of those controls and you're using that as a resistance strength layer, that's the kind of fidelity you need. I think sometimes automation is viewed as a labor replacement capacity, and certainly I think to some extent it could be that. But cyber, we're so short on employees in cyber that anything you can do to get that data onto frameworks and into controls to have a fuller picture, and then increase the accuracy, right, is going to directly influence your exposures. So I see it more as a decision support, and enabling just better management and being more proactive. If we're ever going to get ahead in cyber, we have to automate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you reminisce about the good old days, about how easy it was to just sit down with IT. I remember when GRC was just SOX, and I was responsible for a portfolio of applications 16, 17 years ago. You would just sit down and walk through a couple of controls. Now the volume is just overwhelming. You've got millions and millions of endpoints and containers, and it's so difficult to wrap your arms around that. So let's talk about what CyberSaint does uniquely in the space. And we were talking about CRQ a minute ago. So let's focus on, how does our flexibility, given, we're the only vendor that has different approaches to CRQ. So how does that benefit customers with different needs and different levels of maturity within cyber risk?
Absolutely. I mean, I love this particular question because, from my background in financial modeling, and I came to cyber a decade ago because I had a very good friend who said we should start a company. And I initially was like, that sounds crazy, but he was right. We should start a company, and we did. And to me, modeling is a scientific thing, right? So when you model something, you're saying, okay, here's what we think it looks like. Likelihood looks like this. Be best to have actuarial data to understand likelihood by sector, by company size, things like that. So that's, likelihood can be, adjusted using actuarial data. So can impact sizes, right? Which is important. But some of the extra things you can do, you can have a different model. Now, one thing I've noticed, I think, is to the credit of everyone in information security, is that they do a lot of, and technology more generally, they do a lot of their work based on open source standards. There's a lot of great open source work out there. There's open source risk models, as it turns out. There's open source frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK. There's, the common vulnerability enumeration is basically an open source project, right? So one of the great things about working with different risk models is we can say to clients, look, this might suit you. This might not. So some risk models might be a little more involved. They might require more from the customer. They might need to be a little more mature. Other risk models can be a little bit simpler. They can still be quantitative, even if they're simpler. So one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we had several models in the system is transparency. And, I think we're seeing a greater push for transparency. And arguably, the brief that Gartner wrote is about increased transparency, and interoperability. You can't have interoperability if you don't have transparency. So I never wanted us to be a black box risk model. I know a lot of companies came out because obviously their investors were like, look, create an ecosystem, get everyone in that ecosystem and don't let them leave, right? And black box models are good for that because not everyone understands what's going on in there. And once you're dependent on it, you can't recreate it, right? In a sense. I don't believe in that. I believe in being transparent, and that's why we have several models in system. And it helps because some customers come in and want to adopt one model, and other customers come in and want to adopt another. And in the future, we run these models and services anyway. I could see that even expanding in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic and exciting to talk about and see how we're now actually talking about actuarial science within cyber. I actually got my start in actuary and underwriting from a GRC perspective, and everybody knows that the way underwriters underwrite risk is, every organization is a different level of maturity. There's different appetites and thresholds, tolerances for risk. And so you have to be flexible because, one size fits all, it isn't going to work for every single organization. So when we talk also the unique aspects of what we do around continuous controls automation and compliance automation, how does CyberSaint's control automation technology support the way Gartner describes this capability, and what specific outcomes have you seen with customers as a result of it?
Yeah, Gartner and I have been talking about this for quite some time, going back even maybe 4 years before they were publishing much on control automation, because back then there were only a couple of vendors that were even, talking about it as something they were doing. So we kind of, in our dealings with Gartner, and they've been very, Xi Zhang and some of them over there have been great over the years. Some of the real effects we see from it is increased productivity. It's a big one, right? So one of the biggest companies that uses automation with us had a mandate from their board. Their board basically said, okay, guys, you're doing a great job. But you're a team of 10, right? Say 10 on the tech side and then 5 on the tech side and 5 on the compliance side. But you got to pick up the pace, and we're not going to give you more employees. And they were kind of initially, they were like, well, Padraic, that means we got to automate all these sources. And I was like, great, we've done a lot of the work. Let's start going in that direction. That has increased their productivity 5-fold, if not more. And more is coming as we refine our approach to CCA. So that productivity and the sort of speed of assessment, risk assessment in their case, has been huge. The other aspect, and I think this is where the market is going to go, is in the fidelity of it, right? So as you spoke, and you've seen, environments with massive amounts of assets, right? It's hard to get your arms around some of that. And asset management, just as a discrete area in our field, has struggled. Shadow IT, deduplicating across different sources. The same IP spins up, but whoa, it's a different owner. One was deprovisioned, one came back up. A lot of issues in asset management. So there's vulnerability associated with that, right? There's a lot of configuration management vulnerabilities. If you look at a third of the vectors we look at are some form of configuration management went wrong, right? The only way to deal with that, truly in a cyber risk approach is to have a better idea of what's going on. So the fidelity of the data is going through the roof on automation. That means the risk modeling is going to be all that much clearer, better, more accurate. And doing it on a daily basis, that's huge. And we're doing a lot of R&D around that, because you might get 100, 200 alerts in on a given day. That your whole stack relates to that, right? So how do those 100 or 200 alerts change the context of what you need to do? Humans chasing around after findings, as you well know, is not always optimal, and findings can pile up, right, if they're not related to risk. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for continued automation in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd frame it up as there's really 2 big problems in this space, and you tackled one of them well with how we do it around efficiency. You don't have enough people to chase down all of these problems. The other one is more around the technical aspect that can be a challenge with integration and taking all the different sources of telemetry data to be able to automate this. So how is CyberSaint specifically doing this in a unique way that may benefit organizations as well?
I think it's because we've been out ahead on this stuff. So, our unique way is really just, it's been tested with many customers. So we're also very nimble in our approach. We've discovered all sorts of things along the way on automation and risk management that, we're obsessed with making it easier for customers. Well, Mike, that the problems in cyber are hard to get your arms around, right? But that doesn't mean that the solution should be, just another difficult thing to get your arms around. So we're kind of obsessed with making sure that we take complex problems and solve them as simply as possible. And I think that's one of our advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about wrapping our arms around the totality of the problem, it's not just controls, automation, how we bring it all together so that customers can see month over month how they're trending, how they're benchmark with seeing their cyber risk posture as it changes, seeing ROI, showing their board a return on their cyber risk program. Talk a little bit about how we're uniquely bringing all of that together to show that, kind of real-time growth of your cyber risk program.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing we've been obsessed with for years, because one of the mandates when we started the company was, let's turn cyber risk management into a business function. Let's make sure that all we do in cyber is legible to the business. Now, it hasn't been, and that it hasn't been in technology either, right? In the 90s and in the early aughts, IT lived in a different domain. They might as well have been in, inner Earth. They were just somewhere else, right? It was hobbits, and it was these creatures running around in, underground caves.
They come out every now and then and yell at you for downloading music on your laptop.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, for me, understanding the different components that go into cyber risk management, and my background, more in economics, for me, it's been about translating what we have in cyber, the data we have in cyber, the controls, the threats, the vulnerabilities, the assets, the asset layer, some of the associated things that come out of old GRC that are being reinvented in terms, new terms in cyber GRC. So like findings, for example, which you've been amazingly helpful with helping the company understand, taking some of the things, the best of, right? The best frameworks, the best quantitative methods, and recreating it, I think has been really huge. Now, you could do all that, and if you go into a meeting and you start talking about, the new governance, function in the CSF 2.0, and you start spouting on about how they took governance out of identity and CSF 1.1 and they promoted it to governance 2.0, you're going to lose the business of it. Right. So you have to have an extra layer of translation. And that's something we've been obsessed with. How do you take all that great data, right, on frameworks and controls, assets, and translate it into the business? And you do it with dollars and cents and other metrics that the business can understand. If there are questions, you can drill into it if you need to. But it's really about interoperability across data, across open source frameworks, and rolling that up to the business so they can understand ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get to that state, it's awesome how it all works together. Looking at business objectives, looking at dollars and cents, it really adds a ton of value to the organization. Well, let's see. It looks like we have a few more minutes for a couple more questions. And if you're with us live, don't forget that you can add questions into the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. So, Padraic, looking at the report, what do you see as the biggest takeaway, and how do you believe it reflects the current state of cyber risk management?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, and you pointed this out, and it struck you as well, was the following, and I'll just read it because it is kind of stunning. By 2027, 75% of cyber GRC tool evaluations will include use cases for continuous control monitoring, CCM, cybersecurity continuous compliance automation, and cyber risk quantification. Now, 2 of the 3 of those, and that was stunning to me, because we've been out ahead of the curve, right? So a lot of the conversations we have are with very forward-leading companies, either in the Fortune 500 or in the Russell, or even just privately held at smaller scales. Usually, the teams we talk to are pretty educated on these things, right? They come out of practices like the ones you've been in, really mature, have been doing things for years on open source standards and really have a good approach. The market has shifted. And to hear that Gartner thinks 75% of the tool evaluations will include these things we're doing, and we're currently building the third, right, which is really continuous compliance automation, that's also going to be huge, because that one in particular has not been solved for the enterprise. Evidence collection, automated evidence collection, just there are commodity products that do it pretty well, but it hasn't been solved on some of the true, foundational control frameworks and authoritative sources that the enterprise uses, right? So this to me is really good news. It means that some of the companies that we've been working with were true avatars of this movement. They were the groundbreaking teams. And the great thing about it is, if this is true, and I think it is because I see it in a lot of our calls, it means that the teams that are coming in now are going to inherit a lot of the wisdom of and the technology that has been developed by some of the more forward-leaning companies in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long journey in the controls automation and CRQ space, as we both know and have been in the space for the last more than a decade. A lot of organizations tried to sell a product in these different spaces, and a lot of companies have tried to take it on themselves. And I think now we're starting to see the culmination of that. And what the 2 things that popped to me on that stat were, it's not going to go from 0 to 75% overnight in the next year or 2. I'd probably argue that a third to half of organizations are already looking for this. And the other thing that jumped out at me is a lot of these 2 primary capabilities, automation, compliance automation, and CRQ in the market, that's being done by separate products at the moment. So we have a very unique approach to where we're doing both. We're doing all of it. So how do you think that's going to position us early and to be ahead of everyone at this state?
I mean, I think it obviously is going to position us well. I don't know how you could go out, and I've seen products that go after this in a disparate way without answering, how it relates to other things. So I've seen beautiful automation products that have no way to consume that data that the business can understand, right? It's just a kind of a technology in search of a rationale, right? So I think we're really well positioned, and that's an optimistic thing. Again, the market is swinging around, and that's, it's almost like, been doing this for so long that when you start to see that it's happening, you're like, wow, it's about time,
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting time. There's an old saying, if you don't have a risk, you don't have a control. And if you don't have a likelihood and an impact, you don't have a risk. And we've got that trifecta, and it's very exciting to see where we're at and how it reflects against this report. So
I like that.
Yeah, Patrick, well, thank you for joining me. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've come to the end of our time, and we look forward to speaking to everyone more about this topic. Very excited to talk to you and show you what CyberSaint can offer.
Great, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Real pleasure. Chat soon.
Thank you.